Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be peeling back the mask on John Carpenter's 1978 horror classic Halloween. You got your stack ready, right? Articles, interviews, even that documentary. Well, get ready, because we're about to unearth some seriously fascinating insights into how this low-budget slasher became a global phenomenon.
You know what always gets me about Halloween? It wasn't like an overnight sensation. You know what I mean? It built its reputation slowly, purely on word of mouth, and those whispered warnings about just how terrifying it was. Now, that's a sign of a truly effective film, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like the boogeyman himself creeping up on you when you least expect it. And speaking of the boogeyman, our sources say that the initial concept came from producer Irwin Yablans, right?
Exactly. Yablans had this instinct for tapping into universal fears. He envisioned a film about babysitters being stalked, something that everyone could relate to. And what better night to set it than Halloween? Pure genius.
It's brilliant. So how does this John Carpenter fella, fresh off an action flick, no less, enter the picture?
Well, Carpenter has actually offered a shockingly small fee, $10,000 for writing, directing, and the music. Can you imagine? But what he lacked in budget, he gained in creative control. And that ended up shaping the entire film.
That's wild. It really goes to show that sometimes limitations can breed incredible creativity. Now, this creative freedom leads us to an interesting point. Our sources mention a bit of a debate surrounding Halloween and the film Black Christmas.
Ah, yes, the Black Christmas connection. So it's true that Bob Clark, the director of that film, claimed Carpenter had actually approached him looking for ideas for a potential sequel. This theoretical sequel would be set a year later, featuring the killer escaping a mental institution. Sound familiar?
It does sound a bit like the premise for Halloween now that you mention it, but Carpenter has always insisted that his film was an original idea. So how do we reconcile these two viewpoints?
Well, in a documentary about Bob Clark, he actually clarifies the situation. While Carpenter might have drawn inspiration from Black Christmas, the script for Halloween was already titled and very much its own entity when it landed in Carpenter's lap.
Okay, so not a direct sequel, but perhaps a touch of inspiration.
Precisely. It's a fascinating example of how filmmakers can be influenced by their predecessors while still carving out their own unique paths.
Makes sense. So back to Halloween. $320,000 is practically nothing for a film, even back then. I bet they had to pull off some seriously creative cost-saving measures.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The stories about this film's production are legendary. For instance, they snagged Tommy Lee Wallace for their crew, and let me tell you, this guy deserves a medal. He was their production designer, art director, location scout, and co-editor. Talk about a multitasker.
Wow. They definitely got their money's worth with him. But perhaps the most iconic example of their resourcefulness has to be the Michael Myers mask.
And there's a story for the ages. They simply couldn't afford a custom-made mask, right?
Yeah.
So picture this. Tommy Lee Wallace, on a mission, stumbles into a costume shop on Hollywood Boulevard. And there it is. A Captain Kirk mask practically begging to be a horror icon for less than $2.
$2? Seriously, that's less than my morning coffee.
No kidding. They spray painted it, widened the eyes a touch, and boom. The blank, emotionless face of Michael Myers was born. It's incredible how something so simple became so utterly chilling.
It's a masterclass in minimalism, that's for sure. So, we've got the concept, the killer. What about our protagonist, Laurie Strode? How did Jamie Lee Curtis end up in that iconic role?
It's a bit of a Hollywood story, actually.
Yeah.
Carpenter initially wanted Anne Lockhart for the part, but she wasn't available. That's when Deborah Hill, the co-writer and producer, had a stroke of genius. She realized that casting Jamie Lee Curtis would create a buzz because, well, she was Hollywood royalty.
Being the daughter of Janet Leigh, the star of Psycho, talk about a horror legacy.
Exactly. That connection to Psycho was a huge factor in their decision.
It's brilliant marketing, really. And what about the man behind the mask himself, Michael Myers? Who did they get to embody pure evil on such a tight budget?
The role went to Nick Castle, a friend of Carpenter's from their USC days. He was credited as the Shape, which I've got to admit is pretty creepy.
It is. And can you imagine being told to play the Shape? Talk about a challenge.
Seriously. They were really working with a bare-bones concept here. It's incredible to think that this low-budget slasher launched not one, but 3 major careers. The director, the final girl, and the boogeyman.
It really is a testament to the power of a well-crafted horror film. But I have to ask, how do you even begin to direct the Shape? I mean, Michael Myers barely speaks and you can't see his face.
That's what makes it so fascinating. It's like directing a force of nature, pure instinct. There's a story about how Nick Castle asked Carpenter about his motivation for a particular scene, and Carpenter simply told him to walk from point A to point B and don't act.
Whoa, talk about minimalist directing.
Right. Just walk, don't act. Sounds like a dream role for an actor, doesn't it?
Right. But seriously, he managed to create something truly terrifying with those minimal instructions. How did Castle approach playing such a minimalist yet terrifying villain?
Well, Castle brought a natural sense of movement to the role. In fact, his father was actually a choreographer for Fred Astaire. Maybe it runs in the family.
Wow, really? That's incredible. So much of Michael Myers' menace is in his physicality, that slow, relentless pursuit.
Absolutely. It's like he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And you can't forget about Carpenter's masterful use of the camera. He frequently shoots from Michael Myers' point of view, which puts the audience directly into the killer's headspace, so to speak.
You're right. We're seeing the world through those blank white eyes. It's such a simple technique, but incredibly effective. Okay, we've got the story, the cast, that killer look. But what about the music? You can't talk about Halloween without mentioning that spine-chilling theme.
It's true. That score is bone-chilling. And it almost didn't happen. Can you believe that?
Wait, seriously? What do you mean?
Carpenter actually composed the music after a disastrous test screening. The studio executives thought the film wasn't scary enough without it.
Seriously? Are they crazy? The film is dripping with suspense.
I know, right? It just goes to show the power of a good score. Carpenter's music single-handedly took Halloween from good to legendary.
I couldn't agree more. Every time I hear those opening piano chords, chills. Every time. But didn't Carpenter come from a film background, not a musical one? Didn't he write the entire score himself?
He did. And in 3 days, no less. He couldn't actually read or write music, but he played the keyboard. He composed and performed the entire thing on a synthesizer.
3 days. That's insane. He was on a roll. There's something so deeply unsettling about that theme. What is it about that music that gets under your skin?
It's that unconventional 54-time signature. It creates this very specific feeling. I don't know if you're familiar with music theory.
Not really. You're going to have to break it down for me.
Well, most horror scores use a more traditional 44-time signature, which is what you're probably used to hearing. But that 54 in Halloween's theme creates this off-kilter, uneasy feeling that you just can't shake. It was a stroke of genius, really.
Wow, I never knew that. Music theory for horror films. Who knew?
It's a whole other world. And Carpenter even snuck in a little Easter egg. He credited himself as the Bowling Green Philharmonic Orchestra in the end credits.
That's hilarious. I love it. Okay, so we've got this perfectly creepy score, an iconic look, a terrifying performance. The stage is set. It's 1978. Halloween is finished. How did a low-budget slasher with a Captain Kirk mask become a global phenomenon?
It was a slow burn fueled by word of mouth. Back then, they didn't have the massive marketing budgets or social media we have today. Halloween had a very limited release, initially relying almost entirely on those audience reactions and buzz to find its audience.
It's like the movie itself. It crept up on everyone. But didn't a lot of critics initially write it off as just another slasher flick?
It's true. A lot of those early reviews were lukewarm at best. They missed the mark completely. But something interesting happened. Halloween found its audience. People loved being scared by it. They connected with the suspense, the characters, the raw terror.
And that mask. You can't forget that mask. It was everywhere. People were lining up to be terrified.
It's true. And then something even more remarkable happened. The same critics who had initially dismissed Halloween started to take a second look.
What do you think changed their minds?
I think they finally saw that Halloween was more than just a cheap thrill ride. It was a well-crafted film with a palpable sense of dread and suspense. They realized that Carpenter had crafted something special, something that transcended the slasher genre. And look, it became a massive box office success, which never hurts.
You're telling me it raked in over $70 million on a shoestring budget. Unheard of at the time, especially for an independent film. And it launched a whole franchise. Sequels, reboots, the whole shebang. But a lot of fans argue that none of those subsequent films ever quite captured the magic of the original part. What do you make of that?
That's the challenge with successful horror, isn't it? How do you replicate that initial sense of dread and surprise? It's almost impossible. But what's important is that Halloween sparked a conversation and it made people think about the genre in a different way.
And let's not forget all those debates about the film's deeper meaning. Some critics saw it as a critique of American social values, highlighting the dangers lurking beneath the surface of seemingly perfect suburbia.
And then there were the feminist readings of the film, focusing on Laurie Strode as the final girl, the one who survives while her more sexually active friends are killed off. It's a trope that's been analyzed and dissected every which way.
It's remarkable, really, how one film can be interpreted in so many different ways.
It really speaks to the power of a well-crafted story, leaving space for the audience to interpret and engage on their own terms.
So where does John Carpenter himself stand on all these different interpretations? Did he intend to make a statement about suburbia morality or gender roles?
This is the really interesting part. Carpenter has always maintained that he simply set out to make a scary movie. That's it.
No deeper meaning, no grand social commentary, just pure, unadulterated horror.
That's what he claims. He's actually pushed back against attempts to overanalyze Halloween, calling it true crass exploitation, a throwback to those classic haunted house films.
True crass exploitation. I kind of love that.
Yeah.
So we have this roller coaster of a film that becomes a surprise smash hit. Did anyone involved have any inkling they were creating something iconic, something that would endure for decades?
Not at all. There's this story about Carpenter showing an early cut of the film without the music to a group of film students. And one student apparently criticized it, calling it just another disgusting horror film, and even asked why anyone would want to make something like that. Can you imagine?
Ouch. Talk about adding insult to injury. What did Carpenter say to that?
Apparently, both he and Debra Hill just chuckled and said they were hoping it would at least become a classic one day. And the student, not impressed, called him pretentious and walked out.
Well, who's having the last laugh now? I guess everyone's a critic. But it's safe to say that Halloween exceeded everyone's expectations.
It definitely did. And it's fascinating to see how a film made on such a small budget with a very DIY aesthetic could resonate so deeply and across generations of viewers. It's a testament to the power of a simple, well-told story. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Halloween tapped into something primal, something that continues to frighten and fascinate audiences all these years later.
That's the thing about truly effective horror. Those quiet suburbs, the vulnerability of the babysitter, the relentless, unknowable evil. It's a formula that clearly stood the test of time.
And let's not forget about that chilling score.
Yeah.
Okay, we've unpacked the making of this horror classic from its shoestring budget to its unexpected success. What's your final takeaway for our listener? What should they keep in mind as they explore these sources or settle in for a rewatch?
What I find so fascinating is how effectively Halloween gets under your skin with minimal gore or special effects. As you watch, pay attention to Carpenter's masterful use of suspense, those long drawn-out takes, the way he uses shadows, the music. It's truly a masterclass in creating fear and unease.
You're right. The film relies so much on what you don't see, on what's lurking just beyond the frame. And those performances, Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode is phenomenal. She practically invented the final girl. And Donald Pleasence brings a real weight and gravitas to Dr. Loomis. It elevates the entire film.
Well said. It's a simple story, but it's brilliantly executed.
And that is your deep dive on Halloween. Who knew that a low-budget film with a Captain Kirk mask could become such a horror legend? Until next time, happy viewing, and try not to let the boogeyman get you.